So this morning we're starting a new series, one that I'm really excited about. It's called Jukebox of Wisdom. And one of the things that I'm really excited about in this series is not only that we get to start off with some, hit songs, but actually that is what I'm excited about. So I love the idea that every time we come in for a message, we're going to go into the Jukebox of Wisdom. We're going to select a song, and then the song that you guys listen to will also be the title of the message. And as you can probably imagine, today's message is called, Who's That Lady? Right? We're talking about a very special lady this morning. And some of you might think, oh, is it Candy because she walked back in this morning? Is that the special lady? Is it Erin because she was so faithfully supporting her husband as an elder? Honestly, it could be any one of you ladies because, we know that I hope you know that we love you all. So, but actually we're talking about a very special lady this morning known as the Lady of Wisdom. The Lady of Wisdom. Now, when I was a kid, there was a very special privilege that I had. Now, my dad was a maintenance engineer at a paper mill, and vendors were always selling him stuff, okay? Machine rolls, motors, pumps, felts, electrical stuff, whatever, you name it, right? They were always selling him stuff, natural gas. And what they would do is they would give him stuff to get him to buy their stuff, right? So they would, buy him a new set of golf clubs or take him out to lunch or send him gift baskets or get his prison sentences reduced or whatever. So, I'm kidding. Just to make sure I said that. And basically, some of them would also actually take my mom out to dinner with my dad, and sometimes us kids got to go along for those dinners. Now, one of my favorite places when I was a kid to go to dinner with vendors and my parents and stuff was a place called Golden Dragon. And I was excited because these vendors would come in and they would just open up their expense accounts and we could just get whatever we wanted. Now, I only went a couple of times to Golden Dragon, and I don't even remember which vendor it was that took us. It could have been multiple, but I loved it because it was so much fun to go there because they had so many different unique things to do. First of all, I'd always start off by getting a Shirley Temple, right? Which is exciting when the waitress or waiter or whatever brings you a drink that has like cherries in it, right? And if it was a good day, they'd bring out like the whole bowl of cherries with it, right? So it was like, oh, this is exciting. And then we'd always order the poo-poo platter. Because what kid doesn't want to order the poo-poo platter, right? Now, of course, it isn't poo-poo like it sounds like. Poo-poo is actually Hawaiian for appetizers. And for some reason, American Chinese food restaurants took that over, like that was suddenly part of their heritage. So anyway, we'd always get excited because there would be skewers and egg rolls and crab rangoon, and it comes out on fire, right? Like what kid doesn't want their food to show up on fire at the table? And then there's like a little hibachi grill right in the middle, and you can cook stuff yourself on it. It was exciting. The poo-poo dish was so much fun. And then at the end of the meal, all of us kids would get so excited to find out what our futures were going to be. Why? Because they would bring us a nice little pile of fortune cookies. Right? When you're a kid, it's so exciting to take out that weird-looking shaped cookie and open it up and find that small little piece of imparted wisdom that you could apply to your life. And it usually said something very deep like, Confucius say, always begin with an end in mind. 7, 13, 42, 68, right? And that's what it would say. And you'd be like, oh man, this is so great. And then we'd all look around at each other and be like, what did you get? And we'd be so excited to see what everybody's fortune was. Like, what is our fortune going to be? And we'd throw away the nasty cookie and we'd leave the restaurant thinking that we had our future secured by that little 1/2-inch by 2-inch piece of paper or whatever it was. And usually when you open up a fortune cookie, the fortune is usually pretty good, right? I never got a fortune cookie that said, a big promotion is coming up for someone much more talented than you, right? Like, I never got a fortune like that. But they're also usually pretty generic, right? Like, look how far you've come. Okay? Look how far I've come. All right. I've never talked to a billionaire. Well, I've never talked to a billionaire anyway, but I've never seen like an interview with a billionaire and be like, how did you do it? How did you become a billionaire? Well, a fortune cookie told me to invest in crypto and then pull it out and invest in GameStop, right? Like, you never hear that from a fortune cookie. It never gives you anything specific or really useful, right? So what is a proverb? Well, a proverb is this. A proverb is a short, is that pithy or pithy? I don't know how to say it. What is it? Pithy? Okay. A short, pithy saying in general use stating a general truth or a piece of advice. And essentially, that's what you would find in a fortune cookie, right? A type of proverb. So when we open when we open the Bible to the book of Proverbs, you might be expecting the same thing. Oh, this is just going to be a bunch of fortune cookies, a bunch of short, useless sayings that nobody's going to put any real stock into. But actually, Proverbs are more than a fortune cookie. We actually had Callie Robeson make this for us. She's a very talented artist, and I just love that. More than a fortune cookie. What we're looking at when we open the book of Proverbs is more than just opening a nasty cookie and seeing what it has to say to us. Okay? Actually, today we're going to start to see that much of the book of Proverbs is not just a bunch of random general sayings. So this morning, my plan is to introduce you to biblical Proverbs by explaining what wisdom is. The book of Proverbs is all about wisdom, okay? And so I'm going to introduce you to what wisdom is, why we would want it, and what is its purpose. As I said before, if you're following along with your YouVersion Bible app, today's message is called, Who's That Lady? We're in Proverbs. We're going to look at Proverbs chapter 1, looking at verses 1 through 9. Then we're going to jump ahead to Proverbs 8, looking at verses 1 to 11. And then we're going to jump to Proverbs 8, verses 22 through 31. Okay, so let's open up the book of Proverbs here, chapter 1, verse 1. And we're going to see how this opens up by telling us where the Proverbs came from and why we have them. So here we go, Proverbs 1:1. It says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and let the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." Okay, so we begin with these Proverbs. This says that it's a proverb of Solomon. Now, Solomon didn't write all of the Proverbs, okay? However, he plays a very important role in the book of Proverbs because if you know anything about Solomon, you know that he was famous for his wisdom, right? At a certain point in his life, God gave him permission to ask for anything, and he asked for God's wisdom in how to lead Israel. And we see this if we turn to 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 29. It says, "And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt." So Solomon had a lot of wisdom, right? And so when he got this wisdom, he decided what he was going to do with it is use it and pass it on to other people so that they might benefit from the wisdom he had, which is, interestingly enough, a very wise thing to do. So we see this if we fast forward a little bit to 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 32. It says, "He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. And people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom." So, Solomon was responsible for giving wisdom and also collecting wisdom, compiling a list of wise things. And he recorded that wisdom in Proverbs, okay? Now, in the book of Proverbs, we also see the wisdom of other people as well that he compiled together, all right? And his efforts started the collection of wisdom in every area you could think of. Now, after him, the collection got bigger and more, but it also got more defined. And he compiled all the knowledge of things like plants and animals and fish, right? And just put all of this interesting information together for people. And other nations would actually send people to go learn from Solomon. It was a great place if you wanted to learn about the knowledge that was possible that Solomon had, you would send a representative to go learn from Israel. Now today we have 31 chapters of Proverbs left, and that's in our modern Bible that actually made the cut for Scripture. And the opener here tells us that this was compiled, right, in the book of Proverbs to bring wisdom to people. Now we think of wisdom today as knowledge, right? If you're wise, you know a lot. But this idea of wisdom that he's talking about goes deeper than that, and some of you probably already think of it this way as well, is this idea of applied knowledge, right? It's one thing to know something, it's another thing to actually do it, right? So we have knowledge and we have applied knowledge, but in the Hebrew, the word for wisdom here is the word kokmah. And this means knowledge, but it also means applied knowledge, and it also means skill. right? There were workers in the Bible that were said to have chokmah because they were such good craftsmen, all right? So a woodworker who can make inlaid dovetails would have chokmah, right? A chef who makes the most delicious artichoke stuffed beef tenderloin would have chokmah, right? A video gamer who can make a flawless speed run in a Mario 64 would have chokmah, right? Skill, the ability to do something, all right? So wisdom is knowledge, application, and skill all rolled into one, okay? Now, it's interesting because wisdom itself is actually an attribute of God, right? And we're going to talk about that a little bit better at the end of this message here. But if we choose to use this power called wisdom, right, to take this attribute of God and apply it to our lives, this book tells us that we can live good lives because of that, all right? Now, I don't know if you caught it, but the opening chapter, the part that we just read, actually tells us, it gives us the information of how we can start gaining knowledge. It gives us the first step, right? Now, I said that wisdom is God's attribute. It belongs to Him. Wisdom is something that is a godly thing. And so we read, or we actually read already, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's how you start. If you want to be wise, you have to begin by fearing God. But what does it mean to fear the Lord? The smartest people begin their lives by hiding in a room and shaking because they're afraid of God? Is that what this is saying? Well, no, it's not that kind of fear. Well, what is the fear of the Lord? Well, David Guzik puts it this way. He says, it is the proper reverence that the creature shows the Creator and that the redeemed owes to the Redeemer. So that's actually your first fill in your blank on your Connect card. If you grab that on your way in, you're going to fill in your blanks. Here's your first one. Fear of the Lord is the reverence of the creature, the reverence, I should say, that the creature owes to the Creator and the redeemed owes to the Redeemer. So until this posture of reverence for God is adopted by a person, you can't actually have true wisdom. Your wisdom will be corrupted because your first step is wrong. That means that we can't gain any real useful wisdom without the Lord. We can't will ourselves into becoming more wise. It always comes from God. And sometimes some people have a lot of exterior, less valuable wisdom, but even that comes from God. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. Because sometimes people who don't deserve wisdom still have a little bit, okay? So that's the basic premise of the entire series. Wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord, and He provides more wisdom, and you grow into a wise person, and as you do that, your life will become better. So more wisdom, more better life. Not necessarily more better English, but more better life, all right? Your life will be better if you pursue the wisdom of the Lord. But there's a problem with that. Anybody who's lived a life and has any type of experience at all knows that it doesn't always work that way, right? Bad things happen to good people. Unfortunate things happen to wise people, right? And so as we go through this series, we're going to see over and over again how the book of Proverbs tells us, if you do this, your life will be better. But it sure doesn't seem like it always works that way. So before we get too deep into the series, I want to address something with you about this concept of wisdom. Right? I want to make sure that we understand this before we get in, because we may start leaving this place going, I'm really trying to be wise and my life is just terrible. I don't understand why. Well, there's actually a reason behind that, sort of. So before we get too deep, I want to recognize something about our Bibles, okay? If we look at the list of the books in the Bible, we start off with the Pentateuch at the beginning, right? Also known as the Law. First 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, right? The books that essentially Moses wrote down. Then what? Well, then we get to the books of history, right? This is the historical narrative. This is sometimes called the Old Testament narrative, is these 12 books, right? Also known as the books of history. These tell the story of God's chosen people in a historical way. Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, okay? Those are the books of history. Then we come to the next 5 books, and that's what we're actually in today. These are called the books of poetry, also known as the books of, guess what? Wisdom, the books of wisdom. And that's where we are with Proverbs. Now, it turns out that if you take the book of Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Job, 4 of those wisdom books, they all tell a story together. And all of them were written in some part by Solomon, okay? Now, we also have the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs, which that's a little bit separate. We're not looking at that as part of this explanation. It's still important as a book of wisdom. Solomon has a role in that book. But it's largely because of this concept that we're going to talk about this morning, okay? I want to bring these books together. First of all 4 of those books that I mentioned have a common thread in them. I'm going to read you passages from each one, see if you can spot the common thread. Let's begin with Psalms. Psalm 111:10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All those who practice it have good understanding. His praise endures forever." Proverbs 1:7, the one we just read, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." Ecclesiastes 12:13, "The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." Job 28:28, "And he said to the man, Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding." What is the theme in all 4 of those books? The fear of the Lord, right? That is the basis for wisdom. So when we get to the wisdom books, doesn't it make sense that they would all reference the beginning of where wisdom comes from? I mean, it does, right? They all seem to have the fear of the Lord being wisdom and doing right. And so the story of these books goes like this. Now, we're going to be out of order of canon here, okay? But we're going to start here with the Psalms, okay? The Psalms focus on what the fear of the Lord actually is. It gives us a chance to reflect on the fear of the Lord, right? The book of Psalms, they're all songs and poems that were written mostly by Solomon's dad, David, right? He wrote about half of them. But there's a cast of others that wrote psalms as well, including Solomon. They include praise, saying things like, God is wonderful, God is good, God protects me. But there's also a list of complaints, which usually goes something like, the world is awful, they don't love God, why are they prospering? Okay? Then we get to Proverbs in the series that we're starting today. And the basic idea of Proverbs is, if you pursue wisdom, which begins with the fear of the Lord, you will have a good life. It's like, okay, so if I build up wisdom, my life will be better. But then we get to Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes has a much more downtrodden look on wisdom. I don't know if you've ever read the book of Ecclesiastes before, but I recommend taking that in small doses, or you're going to end up, not in a good place, right? Ecclesiastes is a bummer of a book. And just like the Kickstarter of Proverbs, remember, Solomon is the one that kickstarted collecting these Proverbs. Ecclesiastes is written by Solomon, okay? And he basically says, yeah, pursuing wisdom is good, and it tends to give us good things, but then the book of Ecclesiastes says, but that doesn't guarantee that you'll get good things. It's not I get good if I do right, and I get bad if I do wrong. To put it simply, the message of Ecclesiastes is, we can't change that because we can't control the world. If the more wise you were, the better the outcome was, we would have control of the universe, right? By doing better, we would change the way things are. But it doesn't work that way because it's God's will and not our own, okay? I'd like to do a series on that sometime next year, maybe after Easter. I think it'd be good to look at Ecclesiastes. Just, we'll sing some very happy songs before and afterwards. Then finally we get to the book of Job, okay? Now, if you've ever read the book of Job, this is also sort of a depressing book in a way, but it's not. It's heavy, but it's very interesting, okay? And this book seems to wrap up everything about wisdom. This conversation of the fear of the Lord, he's good, but things are weird, I don't know what to do with it. And it's well, if you're wise, things will be better, but not always, you can't control the world. And then Job wraps all that up in a nice little bow by telling us the story of a man named Job who was wise and did good, right? A lot of good things happened to him because he was wise. But then Satan went to God and accused him, and then a lot of bad things happened to Job. And it's interesting because you know what Satan was accusing Job of? He's manipulating your system, God. He knows that if he does good, he'll get good stuff. So he just keeps doing good because it gives him good stuff. But if you take away the good stuff, he won't be doing that anymore. And that's what he challenges him on. And so after that, his life goes incredibly bad, and we see Job wrestle with things, right? What is going on here? And his friends criticize him. His friends even make up hypothetical things that Job must have done wrong. And Job goes back and forth from, I know God is just, I know he has a reason, to, how is God doing this if he's just? And he's wrestling with this, right? And finally he gets to the point where he just demands an answer from God, God, you tell me right now, why is this happening? And God's like, okay. And God's answer is very interesting. It's very heavy, but it's also a little bit unclear. God begins by answering that question. God, are you just? Are you doing this for a reason? You seem unjust to me. I haven't earned this. Why are you doing this? And God begins with, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Oh, my bad. That's a little scary. And then he goes on, and God's like, what about the weather and the animals and outer space? And God explains that he is the creator of an incredibly complex universe. And his methods and reasons are something that we can't understand. And then God just kind of leaves it at that. He doesn't really give him an explanation. He just says, don't forget who I am. And then all of a sudden, Job gets blessed with double what he had before. And when you read the story from a kind of an elementary overview look, we might go, oh, well, Job passed the test, so God doubled his blessings. But actually, I don't think that's what happened at all. God's blessings were doubled because God chose to bless him that way. Job's punishments, if you will, weren't a punishment for his actions, and his rewards probably weren't a reward for his actions either. It's what God chose to do for Job, right? And hopefully we can do a series on Job next year as well, if not maybe early the following year, 2025. So that brings us to today. All right, we're looking at the book of Proverbs, and I want us to understand that view of wisdom because the more we read this, we're going to hear, oh, the wiser we are, the better our life is going to be. But remember this, your next fill in the blank. God's wisdom is endlessly complex. Right? It's not simple. We can't go, oh, but God, I fed the homeless the other day. How come I got turned down for the loan? Right? This isn't like a cause and effect thing. We follow God's wisdom because it's the right thing to do. Now, wisdom is a heavy topic. It's so much more than just pulling a few words out of a fortune cookie. So let's hop into the Proverbs, and we'll get back to the basic value of wisdom. And here's how Proverbs is kind of laid out at the start. The first 9 chapters of Proverbs are very interesting. The first chapter is introductory, and then up to chapter 7 after that is basically a father giving wisdom to his son, basically. And we're going to come back to that in the coming weeks. But today we're going to jump ahead to chapter 8. And this is going to give us an interesting picture of how God decided to describe wisdom to people. So the first way is this. Let's go back to Proverbs 1:20. It says, wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Okay? So notice something here. Wisdom itself is personified as a woman. So we should ask, who's that lady? I hope someone will introduce her to me, because I would like to have some of that wisdom. Okay? And this lady of wisdom is calling out to mankind, to everyone. But the problem is, people seem to be okay with just ignoring what wisdom has to say, right? James Montgomery Boyce said this, it is probably a safe bet to say that most people today are not much interested in wisdom. They're interested in making money and in having a good time. Some are interested in knowing something and getting an education. Almost everyone wants to be well-liked, but wisdom? The pursuit of wisdom is not a popular ideal. Again, that's probably because of where it starts with. The fear of the Lord. Okay? So, Proverbs 3:13 through 18 also references wisdom as a woman, but we're going to go ahead and jump into chapter 8 like I said. So, let's see. Chapter 8, what is wisdom doing? Well, she's making her plea to mankind again. Proverbs 8, 1 through 11. Does not wisdom call? Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way, at the crossroads she takes her stand. Beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals, she cries aloud. To you, O men, I call, and my cry is to the children of man. O simple ones, learn prudence. O fools, learn sense. Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right, for my mouth will utter truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are righteous. There is nothing twisted or crooked in them. They are all straight to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with her. So notice she's standing virtually everywhere. The heights, the crossroads, the gates. That's because seeking God's wisdom is good for everyone, everywhere, at all times. God's wisdom is good for truck drivers and politicians. It's good for scientists and songwriters. It's good for homemakers and mechanics. Wisdom isn't only shared in classrooms or in temples. It's universal, which means wisdom is for you. Wisdom is good for you. It's good for all of us. Matter of fact, that's your next fill in the blank. Wisdom is available and good for everyone. But notice wisdom, as she cries, she's also persevering, and she's loud, right? She keeps shouting. No matter how many times she is ignored, she continues to shout her message, which doesn't change, because finally her cry is of truth. Now, wisdom's cry is not necessarily positive. It's not necessarily what we want to hear. It's not necessarily easy, but it is always true. She is always true in what she says. Now, what's interesting here is the next thing we're going to see is wisdom describe herself. And we're going to look at that next week. But this week, we're going to jump to verse 22, okay? And in this chunk, Lady Wisdom is going to give us her background, which is very interesting. I mentioned this really briefly earlier that we're going to get to this point. And she is going to explain where she comes from. All right, let's see what this says, Proverbs 8:22. She says, "The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up, at the first before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water, before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills, I was brought forth. Before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep. When he made firm the skies above. When he established the fountains of the deep. When he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command. When he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him like a master workman. And I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world and delighting in the children of man." In the beginning, wisdom was an attribute of God. Wisdom is eternal. Wisdom goes beyond anything that we create, any new ideas that we have, even creation itself. Wisdom goes beyond that. It supersedes creation because it was used to create creation. This kokma, his knowledge, God's application, and God's skill is the source of existence. And that source is something he gives us access to. And so God, when he tells his story in Scripture, he tells it with the skill of a poet. He builds his universe with the skill of a craftsman. He chooses his direction with the skill of a navigator. Which is crazy, because if you're reading this like I am, that means that God does his stuff just like us. But it's actually the other way around. See, when we humans, when we start to display things like guidance and direction and artistry and knowledge and craftsmanship, when we display those things, what we're actually doing is showing off God's image in us. We're showing the world what God looks like when we behave the way that he behaves. That's your next fill in the blank. Living with wisdom reflects God's goodness. People can see the goodness of God when his people emulate it. So when we look around, we can find ourselves overwhelmed with the wisdom of God in creation. I mean, think about that. Do you ever just go outside and look at the trees or look at the sky or look at the ocean or the lakes or whatever and just like find yourself amazed at what God made from nothing? Right? He's not Bob Ross painting something he's seen before. God created something that had never existed. Everything in creation was a first-time shot, not a copy, original work. And honestly, that gives us powerful insight on Paul's verse in Romans 1:20. This is a very famous verse. It says, "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Think about it. This is the problem with mankind yesterday and today, and I'll bet tomorrow. If you think about the wonders of science, right? Think about all the things that we have learned. Plate tectonics and oceanography and astronomy and meteorology, right? And at the end of the day, we go, we're the smart ones. We have knowledge. We have wisdom. And God has nothing to do with any of those things. It was the Big Bang and the primordial soup and random chance and all these things. And the Bible says, you claim to be wise, but you are a fool. Why? Why would these incredibly smart people be called fools? Because anyone can look at this great, big, beautiful universe and say, yeah, God didn't do that. If you can look at everything we have around us and go, yeah, that wasn't intentional, then you've discovered nothing, really. Here's your next fill in the blank here. Without the fear of the Lord, your wisdom is useless. So the Bible tells us that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. When you start with God, you end up learning more and more and more about truth. This universe teaches us about God, right? But if you start out with something else, some other belief, some ignorance of God's existence, then you might learn all sorts of very interesting facts and figures, but your real wisdom doesn't have a good foundation. Let me explain this in terms of math. If you haven't been to junior high in a long time, you're going to struggle like me. So here we go. We're talking about wisdom, so let's check out this equation up here, right? We all remember that we need to please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, right? Or wasn't there other ways to remember that? Like pasta, exits, or something? I don't know. Anyway. So we start off with parentheses first, right? Help me out with the math here. What's the first parentheses? What's the answer to that? How about the other one? Okay, you guys are smart. All right, so what do you do with those numbers that are left over? And what does that become? 25. Good job. All right, so some of us did pass middle school for good reason. Good. Okay, so that's the answer to the equation, right? We did all the steps. We got there. Let's start this over again, and let's suppose that we make a mistake on the first step. Let's say that when you saw 2 plus 3 there, you got messed up and you came up with 6, right? All right, well, let's continue on with the math problem. What's 10 minus 5 on the other side? 5. Okay, so what do? We multiply those and you get what? 30. Is that the right answer? No. Why? Because step 1 was wrong. It doesn't matter that you do all the other steps after that correctly, because you started off wrong. Think about that. If your beginning is incorrect, what use is having everything else you do be right after that? It doesn't matter, because the truth is you actually don't know anything of value if you don't know God. If he is the author and creator of the universe and everything we do is to serve him and to please him, and you come up with an answer at the end, you can come up with, I could explain why the epicrotic theory can satisfy the Fermi paradox while not contradicting the Drake equation. It's like, well, that's impressive, but if you do that based on the premise that God doesn't exist, then you can't actually land on the right answer, because everything you do assumes he's not there. The whole purpose of our existence is for God's pleasure. And if we remove him from the equation, what do we actually know? We just believe falsehood that looks sort of accurate, but we still don't know the truth because it's flawed at its most basic level. Even the smallest child who fears the Lord and knows nothing else is more wise than the most brilliant scientist who doesn't know God, because at least they got the beginning right. You can't be an author with any value if you don't understand the alphabet. You can't be a star player in the NBA if you don't know that you're supposed to put the ball in the hoop. Right? You can't grasp the wisdom of the universe if you don't have reverence for the one who made it. So here's the conclusion this morning. Wisdom is much more valuable to us than just a fortune cookie, a made-up red text that says something interesting, right? God's wisdom stands in the streets and the mountaintops and the gates and is available to everyone and is shouting her wisdom, hoping that people in foolish places will actually start in a place of real knowledge. And so here's the question for you. As wisdom shouts to you, will you seek her knowledge? Will you let her go to work in your life in the way that honors the author of life? And if the answer is clear, then the way that you begin is clear. It begins with the fear of the Lord. Recognize his power. Recognize his justice. Recognize his goodness. Revere him from the depths of your soul because honestly, he deserves that from us, right?